Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Musu Gaming here, and today we'll be doing another Best Commander Pairing series. But then, for this time, it's going to be for KVK 1. For those of you who actually do follow my channel, I did post a couple days ago about the Best Commander Pairing for pre-KVK season. I basically went through all the different possible combos that I've seen in the when you first start off the game, and then before you enter for your very first KVK, what kind of combos have I seen? For example, Charge Metal Sun Tzu. And then basically went over each of those marches accessibility in terms of like how easy it is for you to actually get those, what kind of buffs that they have, what kind of relative buffs that they have for each skills factor and skill cycle, and then gave them a little bit of evaluation in terms of what is the best kind of field march that you can actually have, what is the best rally march that you can have, what is the best garrison march that you can have for pre-KVK season. And if it is very difficult for you to actually get those commanders, I gave it kind of like a black dark crown. It's kind of like a Dark Souls or whatever. So I gave those evaluations. But then again, for KVK 1, it's going to be vastly different because of introduction of new commanders called Richard the First and Yi Sung-ge. And here's how this is going to play out. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the PC version of the game. I'll go over each of those new commander skills and then what they actually mean in relative to other commanders that are available at this stage. And then we're going to come back to this sheet and then take a look at, okay, like let's say what kind of combinations are more common during the KVK 1 with those new commanders, and compare them to one of the best commanders that we actually seen for pre-KVK stage, and then give them a final evaluation so that we can find out what is the best commander pairing that you can use in your KVK season 1. Whew. Okay, well, so this is how this video is going to go. If you are going to enjoy it, if you actually do enjoy this video, please drop a thumbs up, subscribe to the video, and leave a comment if you have any questions about anything that I actually did. And let's go ahead and jump right into the game. So let's take a look at the two very strong commanders that will be available for you during your very first KVK. Now, if you want more information about what those commanders do, as well as best commander pairings, what their museum buffs are, and so forth, please go ahead and find the unofficial commander spotlight links from the description down below. But then again, I'm just gonna go ahead and take a very quick skim at what they do. So Richard the First. Richard the First is the very first commander that will be available for you right before KVK 1. And his skill set is basically designed for you to take a lot less damage, heal yourself, and then buff up your buff up your march. So his first skill basically heals you with a great amount with 1400 damage factor. See, that may not sound like a lot, but then again, he also reduces the damage of whatever you're targeting in a fan up to 5 enemy targets with his first skill, and also slows them. Now, this 1400 damage factor, along with this first skill as well as his fourth skill, which gives you extra 30% healing bonus, allows this Richard commander, the new commander, Richard the First, to survive extremely long time in the field. So first skill, fourth skill combined, he will basically heal himself a ton, is the bottom line of what this commander does. And then his second skill, he takes 15% less damage and does 10% more counterattack damage. Now this second skill, as well as his expertise skill, which takes 5% less damage, if you have an expertise switcher, you're going to unconditionally take 20% less damage, which is huge. This is a very large damage reduction that you'll actually get, and these will stack with some of the other damage reduction factors that you can get from from your talent tree, such as this one right here, Lose Formation, which will basically take 9% less skill damage and so forth. So very powerful damage reduction ability with second and expertise skill. And now his third skill gives him 15% attack, 15% defense. You can't complain about giving you a lot more stats. 30% is a decent amount for KVK 1. So let's go ahead and move on. So that's Richard. Richard basically heals himself, takes a lot less damage than other commanders do, and it does buff itself basically. And 이성계 YSG. So 이성계 is basically the strongest area of effect damage DPS damage dealer that will be available for you in KVK 1, and he was one of the strongest AoE damage dealer in the game until I think 2023 when Zhuge Liang, which was the upgraded version of Yi came along and basically kind of put Yi to the bench a little bit, but he is still very widely used for a lot of governors who are in Season of Conquest even to this day. So Yi is a very, very strong commander, and let's see what makes him so strong. So his first skill, which is also an expertise skill, it deals direct damage to up to 5 nearby target enemy troops with 1700 damage factor. So this may not sound like a lot, but 1700 damage factor is even higher than whatever we had. The highest, which is Metmes expertise skill, which gives you about 1350 for up to 5 targets. So this itself is already really strong in that field. But then again, this deals damage up to 5 nearby enemies. So that means that he's going to deal 1700 damage factor to 5 nearby enemies in a circular AoE. So this is the very first commander that will be available for you to deal damage in a circular AoE, which is the greatest area that you can do damage within Rise of Kingdoms. So this skill right here, first skill and active and his expertise skill, actually will deal the most amount of area effect damage to the most area in the game, basically. So he's gonna get a very strong, powerful commander with his first skill alone. But now he doesn't stop here. His fourth skill actually amplifies that damage by 50%. So this commander's troops deals 50% more skill damage. Now, combined with the most amount of AoE damage, with most amount of area covered with that AoE, 50% damage, skill damage makes him so overpowered in KVK Season 1 that if you actually want to be competitive in this KVK Season 1, you will need Yi Seung-gye expertise for sure. But then again, so those two skills don't really need additional explanation. Those two skills combined together will just deal massive damage to area of effect damage. And those two are not conditional to any archers or cavalry or infantry. So just those two alone, those two core skills will actually be usable for any governor that are maining either infantry, cavalry, or archers. So very strong two skills that are available for you regardless of your skill troop type. Now his second skill does have a little bit of archer, so whenever this commander's troop launches a basic attack, it has 10% chance to gain 100 extra rage and gain 100% bonus to archer unit attack for 3 seconds. So not a bad skill for the archer unit attack, but then again, just for that first half of this effect is also already good enough for you to actually be used for cavalry and infantry. So gain 100% extra rage with 10% chance is already really good. So that will actually amplify his potential DPS a lot further. So just keep that in mind. This is a pretty good skill regardless of the fact that even if you're not using him as cavalry or infantry march. Now let's take a look at Joseon Dynasty. This is basically the only trash skill that he has. If you're city garrisoning, you gain 10% attack, and your watchtowers do 10% additional attack. is not bad, but then again, you're rarely going to actually need to defend your garrison, city garrison, to be honest. So, okay skill there. Now let's go back to the spreadsheet and take a look at what those two commanders can be paired with, and then decide what kind of marches will be king of KVK 1 for field, rally, and garrison. So now we're back. So now we're back at this KVK 1 sheet, and I've actually put in each and every commander pairing that I've actually seen most often during my first KVK 1 time. Again, this is like 2 to 3 years ago, so I don't remember 100%, but I think I actually put down almost all the possible combinations that are most commonly used by most governors. But let's take a look at our first line here. Richard and Lee Sung-ye, first comp. Richard and Lee Sung-ye are two of the strongest commanders that are added to the game. So naturally, if you combine those two together, they will be very strong. And their accessibility is B, because Wheel of Fortune commanders are actually pretty accessible, more accessible in my opinion than Gold Key commanders. For one, because your investment in those commanders are actually going to be pretty safe for your KVK 1 and KVK 2, and they're really extremely strong. So a lot of commanders, a lot of governors actually do invest in those two commanders. And unlike the gold keys where you don't actually get to choose what kind of commanders that you want, Wheel of Fortune actually allows you to choose what commander that you actually want to pull for, even though you're spending a lot of gems for those. So accessibility for two Wheel of Fortune commanders, Richard and Lee Sung-ye, or accessibility B, in my opinion. It does give 15% attack and defense from Richard himself. Gives itself 20% damage taken, which is a huge damage taken. So it does provide that tankiness that Lee Sung-ye lacks. Lee Sung-ye is a glass cannon, and if you have him behind Richard, you can have a peace of mind with the fact that a lot of people are not going to target you, because trying to kill Richard in KVK 1 is just absurd. So I did take into consideration the 10% chance for 100 raised Richard, the Lee Sung-ye's second skill, with 2 second duration, 5 second cooldown, so with 17 second skill cycle, and then 15% skill damage and 30% healing bonus. Now, how much damage can this march do with one skill cycle, assuming that skill cycle will take 10 seconds? So minimum is actually 46.55, which is not bad actually. If you take a look at all the other marches that I have listed here, there's not that many marches that actually go above this amount. But then again, he does the same amount for rally. And realistically, if you actually have Richard and Lee Sung-ye, most likely you are going to hit 4 targets, just because of the fact that circular AoE does so much damage. It's very easy for you to hit 4 targets, in my opinion, in your KVK 1. So your realistic damage factor will basically take into consideration that Richard will hit 3 additional targets on top of the very first one. So if you calculate that into factor, you deal about 7,900 damage factor in average for each skill cycle. Keep in mind, again, I did take into consideration that 10% chance for 100 rage thing, as well as healing damage bonus, healing bonus relative buff as well. So this actually combines not only the damage that it does, but also the healing that it does to yourself too. So again, not a bad damage, but then again, it does make them really tanky. So I think this is a pretty good comp. Now, if you look at the Charles Martel and Lee Sung-ye, so Charles Martel is actually a little bit more accessible in my opinion than Richard, just because of the fact that you can get him from Mightiest Governor and you can get him from gold keys and various events leading up to KVK 1. So I did give him a little bit more accessibility at the KVK 1 stage. Again, you have played this game a little longer than your pre-KVK stage. So Charles Martel having more sculptures of him is actually more accessible, and so forth. So that's why I gave him a little bit better accessibility. Buffs for Charles Martel, Yi Sung Ye, he gets 20% defense, 20% health if you're using him as infantry march. He does have 20% movement speed, which is actually pretty good because Yi Sung Ye doesn't have any movement speed. So moving around faster so that you can evade all those Minamotos that are attacking you is not too bad. Counterattack damage of 30% is pretty good, stronger than Richard's counterattack damage. And with that said, Charles Martel's first skill also does 30% damage amplification for his secondary commander. So I did take all of that into consideration. And because Charles Martel actually buffs whatever Yi Sung-ge does so much, and Yi Sung-ge's second skill, Yi Sung-ge's skill actually also is buffed by his own 50% skill damage, the damage for one target is not that much different. But then again, if you actually go into realistic and maximum hitting target, maximum damage that you can do on the field, it does go up to about 9,000, which is pretty good. It's probably one of the best damage that you can do, damage commander pairing that you can bring out in KVK 1 for infantry mains. Now, I did take into consideration Charles Martel and Richard. This is a very tanky commander pairing, and as soon as your enemies actually realize that you're bringing Charles Martel and Richard together, they're not going to attack you. But if you do bring those, you'll get 20% movement speed, 40% counterattack buff. That is huge. And you also take 20% less damage, and you heal yourself a lot better. But then again, this 30% damage to secondary is actually not going to be applicable because healing is not buffed by the 30% damage buff that Charge Martel does. So this is okay. I just put him in because some people actually do use Charles Martel and Richard. So just for your information. And the next couple are actually basically, if you're, let's say you're not able to bring Yi Sung-ge onto the field, and let's say because you're using Yi Sung-ge to support your main troop type, which is, let's say, Minamoto, or for cavalry and Tutmos for archer, then what is the alternative that you actually have? You can actually still use Sun Tzu from your pre-KVK days. And Charles Martel Sun Tzu, the accessibility is a little better than it was pre-KVK. I think I gave it an A during pre-KVK, and now it's A+ because you had more days for you to actually get more sculptures of Charles Martel at this stage. It does give you pretty decent stats, and does give you movement speed. It does give you counterattack damage taken. This is actually one of the strongest march that I rated. I thought this was one of the best field march. This is the best field march during the KVK 1 stage. So this march right here does not do a lot of damage to a single target, but if you're actually able to hit all 5 targets with the small cone AoE that you can do with Sun Tzu, your damage potential for AoE is actually the greatest, even better than Charles Martel Yi Sung-ge. And the reason for that is because Sun Tzu, unlike Yi Sung-ge, whose area of effect damage diminishes for each target that you're actually hitting, Sun Tzu's skill doesn't do that. Sun Tzu's skill just gets stronger as it hits more target. And on top of that, Sun Tzu's active skill, actually has 50 additional rage generated per each target hit. So with 1,000 rage damage skill cycle, you actually have a big amplifier factor that I factored in, which is actually 33% damage amplification that you can activate from this skill alone. So potentially, Charge Martel and Sun Tzu has the most damage factor potential on the field if you can hit 5 targets all the time with your cone AoE with Sun Tzu. So if you're going to use Yi Sung-ge to other commander pairing, I would really recommend that you still use Charles Martel and Sun Tzu. Now, with Richard added to the game, I did actually add another commander pairing here. So this is an alternative to Charles Martel Sun Tzu. I think I will use this if you're already using Charles Martel Yi Sung-ge as your primary and you want to still utilize your Richard because you're maining infantry, then Richard Sun Tzu is a great option. And not only they do pretty good damage. So the only difference between Charles Martel and Sun Tzu is the fact that Richard doesn't amplify Sun Tzu's AoE damage. But so let's take a look at this section right here. So damage taken will be all the way up to 30% if you pair Richard and Sun Tzu. This is because Sun Tzu has 10% additional damage reduction from his, I think, second skill, third skill, whatever it is. It gives him a lot of damage reduction on top of Richard's massive damage reduction effect. So theoretically, if you have both expertise, Richard and Sun Tzu on the field, they will take 30% less damage, which is huge. Again, this stacks with all those skill damage reduction and whatnot. So this is a very, very, very strong tanky march that can also do a lot of damage. Now, Sun Tzu also has 20% damage, skill damage buff, as well as the 50 rage per target hit. So a very decent march. I would say this is probably one of the better infantry marches if you're not maining infantry and you have to use Yi Sung-ge elsewhere. Alright, let's move on to our new marcher, Minamoto Yi Sung-ge. So Minamoto and Yi Sung-ge strangely work really well despite Yi Sung-ge being an archer commander, Minamoto being cavalry commander, because one, both of them do very, very I almost cursed a lot of damage. So Minamoto does massive single target damage. Yi Sung-ge does massive AoE damage. So those two paired together strangely does really well. So they have 20% damage attack buff with 10% movement speed from Minamoto. And with all those other buffs, on top of all those other buffs from Yi Sung-ge, Minamoto also has 10% chance for 30% damage buff for 3 seconds. So if timed right, this is actually pretty good. In average, its expected value is only like I think like 5-6% buff, because this only happens 3 seconds out of the 18 seconds. If you calculate that out, it's actually not a huge amount, I feel. It's only 5% buff. But then again, if you get lucky, this could do a lot of damage. But let's go ahead and take a look at what he does. If you're hitting a single target, it does 6,711 damage factor. That is huge. That is actually the most amount of damage that you can do in KVK Season 1. In my opinion, I think, because it amplifies whatever Minamoto deals by 50%, and on top of that, it also amplifies the Minamoto's single target damage as well. So this is very strong, the strongest rally damage that a single march can do at at this stage, so KVK 1. And not only that, this march also slaps when it targets multiple marches on the field as well. Just because Yi Sung-ge does so much AoE damage. So this march right here, once you actually go through the full 10-second skill cycle, it still does 10,134 damage factor in the field. And granted that that's actually the maximum amount that he can get. this is a lot. This is way more than any of the other realistic damage factor that we actually took a look at so far. And this is the second best damage for, spoiler alert for you, that you can do on the field for for yeah for KVK1. So very strong pairing. I've actually used this as a cav main so much in KVK1 that I was very successful in terms of getting a lot of kills and stuff during the KVK1 with this pairing. So very recommended in my opinion. Having movement speed also helps just because of the fact that you need that extra movement speed if you want to run away from danger too, and you're actually chasing down something. So yeah, a very strong pairing. I'll just go ahead and just touch a little bit on those other ones. So Minamoto CC, single target damage nuking comp that was probably very widely used in pre-KVK stage, not so much during the KVK1, just because you can just, if you're actually maining cavalry, you can just use Isange or any other commanders that does AoE damage. So this is for pre-KVK stage, maybe it's very good for rallying, but if off of pre-KVK stage, not so much usable because Minamoto alone will amplify that rally damage by a lot just because he has that 50% skill damage too. So probably one of the commander pairing that falls off the most from pre-KVK to KVK1. Now, if you're looking at Minamoto and Mehmet, this is probably one of the stronger AoE comp that you can use in KVK1. Along with Bybars, which is an epic commander, which is a lot more accessible for you than Mehmet, who is a gold key commander. But then again, both of them just falls behind so much from Minamoto Isange that I can't really recommend those two pairings anymore if you're thinking about maining one march of cavalry that you want to use for either field or rally because of how strong Minamoto Isange is. So that's it for those cavalry march pairing. So just recommend using Minamoto Isange if you're actually using one strong cavalry march. But if you're not, you can use other pairings. Like Minamoto Bybars is very cheap for you to use, especially for KVK1. But yeah, Minamoto Isange, very strong. Now moving on to archers. So Tutmos Mehmet was pretty decent pairing that you could use for archers. That's probably one of the only pairings I think you can use and that is viable for KVK1. But then again, Tutmos Mehmet is very difficult for you to get. Tutmos the same way. Even as you enter KVK1, they're both very strong. They're both pretty strong, but then again, very difficult for you to get. So I don't recommend that you use this if you can't get your hands on Tutmos Isange. For archer mains, this is where your Rise of Kingdoms life become better. So let's just take a look at why that's the case. So Tutmos Isange, I gave its accessibility B tier, B minus tier, because Tutmos is a gold key commander. Very difficult for you to get at KVK1 stage. In fact, I played this game for over 1,000 days and I still don't have Tutmos maxed. But now, let's take a look at what Tutmos does. Sorry about that, my wife actually just walked in on me and I actually am filming this 2 days later from whenever I was recording the previous parts of the video. So if you feel like there's a bit of a disconnect, there is something that I actually did change on the sheet. I did make some correction for the Tutmos Isange damage factor because I noticed there was a bit of a mistake. But anyways, Tutmos Isange, the reason why they're so good is, for one, Isange lacks a lot of stat buff. Isange does have that 10% chance for 100% damage factor, but then again, that only lasts for 2 seconds and it happens every 17-18 seconds. So that's not a huge buff that you can actually expect and rely on a lot. But Tutmos actually provides you the movement speed that he desperately needs, which is very strong. And on top of that, he also gives 15% attack, 10% defense. So gives him the stats that Yi Cheng needs the most on the field. That's not to say that will make them faster than cavalry per se, but the movement speed will allow you to survive, allow you to do more damage more consistently on the field. On top of that, Tutmos actually has a couple buffs that will make them so much stronger. So one of them is actually the 15% out of alliance territory damage. So this is a very reliable buff, although you might not think that's a pretty decent damage buff. A lot of the time, 67% of the time, when you're fighting in KVK, you are actually fighting outside of your territory. Whether you're fighting in altars, whether you're fighting rallying something, 15% outside of alliance territory will apply for you almost at 67% of the time that you're fighting. So this is a pretty reliable buff. And also at the same time, 10% for a chance for 15% skill damage taken for with 8-second cooldown. So this one right here, 3-second duration. This right here actually does decent amount of amplification for your skill damage. It's not a whole lot, but last time I checked, I think that's about 2%, 2.1% additional damage that you can take, that you can deal to whatever target that you're hitting. So it's not something that is too amazing, but then again, it does amplify like that 15% outside of alliance territory buff. Now, 10% chance for 700 damage factor. This is huge. This combined along with the skill damage buff of 50% from Yi Sung will synergize so well that he will do a lot more damage on the field. And Yi Sung skills actually will just work really, really well with everything that this March has in particular. And with that said, its single target damage is 5,800, which is a lot for the fact that they're both AoE damage dealer. March, 5,800 for rally, the same thing. And then if you get to realistic damage, so if we think that Tutmos will hit 2 targets, Yi Sung will hit 4 targets, that's the 10,941 is the damage factor that we can kind of expect based on the calculation that I did. So again, 2 people hitting, 4 people hitting, and that 700 damage factor that will take about 18 seconds for you in average to trigger out of 10-second cycle that we're considering, and 50% multiplication for all skill damages, 15% damage factor outside alliance damage, territory damage, and I believe this one is the rage reduction, rage increase. And this is that skill damage taken, but a debuff that you can actually apply on it. All that combined together will give you the highest realistic damage output that you can expect, and almost highest maximum damage that you can deal if you hit max target. So with that said, I think this March, out of just pure skill damage perspective, does really, really well, and which is why I included it. And this is probably the only option that archers would have in terms of the best March at the end of KVK 1. So if you're an archer main, you should consider using this March, because this is going to be better than almost any other March that you can use as an archer main. Tutmos Ethelfled, this is just here to basically give you a comparison of how much amplification of damage that you're going to get by using Yi Sung-ge over Ethelfled. So way more damage that you can do, almost twice as much if you're fighting on the field for any scenarios. So just keep that in mind. And that's pretty much all the commanders that we wanted to look at today. And let's just go ahead and move on to the final evaluation. If you watched the previous video, there's 4 different sections here. One is honey, which means that I will recommend that you do it because of all different factors combined together, whether it is accessible, whether it is good in later down the road, whether it is very strong. Just overall, just think of it as I'm giving it like a Michelin star or a Michelin star, 2 star, 3 star. It is just absolutely great march for you to have. It is recommended that you actually bring those marches out on the field. So for this one, I would actually give it to Charles Martel and Lee Sung Jae. The reason why I would do it for Charles Martel and Lee Sung Jae is because Charles Martel's 30% damage to secondary just does a huge amount. You can see that despite this march being pretty tanky, pretty fast, it does 9,000 damage. I think this is probably the best pairing that you can have for infantry if you have Charles Martel to a level that's like 5511 or 5515, whatever it is that Charles Martel is really strong with. I think Richard Lee Sung is also really good, just because it does a little less damage, but the 20% damage reduction is huge. So you're doing basically the basic trade off of whatever you can do on the field versus how much damage you're going to take. So, very recommended build right there. I would recommend that you actually use those two, one or the other, and along with another commander pairing for infantry, which I would suggest that you actually do Sun Tzu, Charles Martel over Richard Charles Martel, just because of the fact that how strong Sun Tzu Charles Martel could be if you're in a big murder ball fight. You can see that the maximum damage output that it can do, although you're using an epic commander, is huge. I think so. Those four, I'll also give another honey to Richard Sun Tzu, because those four kind of is really based on your skill level and preference. Again, the calculations done based on your expertise, both commander ish calculation. But then again, let's say you have a better Charles Martel, I would just pair Charles Martel with Lee Sung Ge. If you have better Richard, I'll just pair Richard with Lee Sung Ge, and then do give your secondary best infantry tank to Sun Tzu. So these comp right here, 2 march comp for infantry, I'll just use interchangeably, and then they are very strong in KVK 1 in my opinion. They're probably the strongest marches that you can bring in KVK 1. Now, I will say Minamoto Isange is a very, very strong march. This is usable in rally, this is usable in field. It is just overpowered march in my opinion. And if you're not running 2 infantry marches, you can just use Sun Tzu and whatever infantry commander that you have better of, Charles Martel or Richard, and then use Isonge and YSG and Minamoto, and you will run a truck, 2 different trucks that will hit and destroy all your enemies in KVK 1, in my opinion. So if you're cab main, Isonge and Minamoto combined will do great, the best in rally, and second best in terms of the field damage total output. With that said, Archer. So I wouldn't give this one a honey, because if you want to actually get Tutmo's expertise, which is where he would really shine at the end of the day, Isungge's Tutmos will be really strong, but getting Tutmos to a usable level will be very difficult. He's not a Wheel of Fortune commander, so your access to Tutmos is a lot more limited than Richard. He's not a Mighty's Governor commander, so your access to him is a lot less than Charles Martel. Minamoto is just instantly expertiseable. So comparing Minamoto to Tutmos in terms of accessibility is just not there. So I will not give this one a honey, just because of the fact that how difficult it is for you to actually get those. All right, let's just go ahead and move on to the field. So field, what is the best commander pairing in the field? And I'll give the gold crown to, what is the average here? I'll give the gold crown to Minamoto Isange. It is a little bit of an over investment in my opinion, because Minamoto does well on its own, Isange does well on its own. But then again, Minamoto Isange is such a strong march to have, and not to mention the fact that he has 10% movement speed and he's a cavalry commander, so he can run around doing AOE without risking, getting caught by a bunch of infantry march. If you're seeing Richard or Charles Martel on the field, you just have to go around them and then target another archer march. So, cavalry has that innate strength in the field because of how fast they are. And I would say Minamoto is way more accessible than Charles Martel or Richard in terms of accessibility. So I would say this is probably the best march that you can have on the field. I'll also give the Black Crown, which means that it is really, really strong on the field, but it is very much likely that you will not have them by KVK1. I'll give the Black Crown to Tutmos YSG. Uh, in theory, it has the most damage output on the field for realistic terms. But then again, in reality, you might get hunted down by a lot of Minamotos on the field because everyone who's a spender in KVK1 will have an expertise Minamoto, and they'll just hunt you down as soon as they see the fact that you're a nurture main that's on the field. So, but then again, technicality of it, they synergize so well. The Tutma synergizes so well with Isange that it is worth noting that he's probably one of the best field that you can actually bring on the field. For rally, I think Minamoto Isange is the best. Charles Martel and Richard are good, but they're not going to be usable on the rally as much. Tutmos Isange is good, but not as good as Minamoto Isange on KVK1 in my opinion because of how much Isange does to single target damage, and that's what you need at the end of the day for your rally. So Minamoto stands as the single best rally in my opinion. But Garrison, I would say for the Garrison, Charles Martel and Isange is the best. Just because it does a lot more counterattack damage. Damage taken reduction of 20% and Richard and Nissan gets good. But at the end of the day, you want to do is maximize the damage that you do to whatever is targeting you and counterattack buff and secondary 30% damage to the Isange's huge AoE skill is really the best in my opinion for Garrison for KVK1. You can disagree, and if you think Richard and Isange is the best, that could be correct. But my opinion, I think Charles Martel Isange is the better of the two Garrisons there. In terms of Black Crown, I don't think there is any other potential Garrison combo that I will crown with Black Crown. The accessibility wise, the Garrison just Charles Martel Isange is just best. It's very accessible. Not very accessible. It's like acceptable level accessibility wise. So I think I'll just use Charles Martel Isange if I'm garrisoning something in KVK1. So that's it for the video. I hope you liked it. It was a long video. I hope I didn't bore you out as much. And please let me know. Leave a comment or like down below. And please subscribe. About 98% of you are not subscribed to the channel, and I would love to see a lot of you return and get more insight about Rise of Kingdoms as far as what I can gather at least. The next couple videos will be about KVK2, which could be boring for a lot of you who are not actually in that stage and in Season of Conquest, let's say. But then again, I'll eventually get there. So what I wanted to do is actually stack up a lot of different guys. So for future people who are actually starting off the game earlier on would actually get more insights on that. But again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Thank you.